Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of relationships matter. And today I am joined by Jen Horgan, and I'm so looking forward to our conversation. Really, really excited. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Hi, Jane. How are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for doing this. It's really kind of you.
Oh, no, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Super. So just to start, Jen, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, well, I'm a teacher. I teach in a secondary school in Cork, and I have 3 kids as well in primary school. And I'm also I write a column for the Irish Examiner on education. And I've written a book about the Leaving Cert and my desire for change in the system in general, and very much in the Leaving Cert itself. And I also write poetry.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, yeah.
Thanks, Jen. So I am also very excited by the fact that you do write poetry, and you're going to share a couple of pieces, I think, with us today.
Yeah.
So maybe before we get into the interview, if you'd like to choose one of them for us, that would be super.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. It's always lovely to have an opportunity to read a poem. So this is one called Early Morning, and I wrote it based on a walk to work. I saw just an old man on my way, and he just sparked this idea. I wanted to sort of draw out care in men. Actually, in this piece was important for me because I think we often associate care and care work with women. So that was kind of the intention. So it's called Early Morning. Someone spread the crumbs before daylight, an even off-white offering for city crows. The shredded bread must have looked like snowflakes in the darkness, caught by the neon glow of a Maxaw garage where men have begun their work, washing metal, filling tanks, checking parts. Love is everywhere if you can see it. I imagine a man's hand spreading the breadcrumbs too, his ruddy skin and bone, not moving much, bent forward in a wax jacket, tweed cap askew, white beard yellowing, same color as Guinness scum soaking through discarded beer mats. He misses the warmth of his local pub these days, his usual haunts, craves some company, smiles to see their slick, wet feathers reflecting pools of petrol blue, drawn to the smell of the pumps, the rump of an old man with old hands always giving. I force a smile out of a young woman passing, her eyes lost, return at my insistence. I imagine the man from the morning, bird feeder, back inside his pebble-dashed terrace on the outskirts of town, remembering his father tying his small bike to the outside gate, remembering his father's face in focus, yanking that final knot in place.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was beautiful. Really, really evocative. And I do love the fact that you chose to focus on men's caring abilities and delicacy and vulnerability as well. It's really, really lovely. And I look forward to more as we move on. But to talk a little bit about care now, and you mentioned that you're a mom and you're a teacher. So what is your own understanding, I guess, of the importance of relationships, and particularly safety and a kind of secure attachment to the primary caregiver, and how this then might have impacts over the life course, including in classrooms, for example?
I think it's everything. I think it's absolutely the first and most important thing for all of us. And we know now more, don't we, with neuroscience? We know that the brain is malleable and it forms so much in those early years, and forms in response to those relationships. And so, yeah, I think the issue we have, and that I've even had personally as a mother, is that having the time and space to give to it. I remember actually the first time I came across attachment theory, I was teaching psychology, A-level psychology, and I had just had my third baby. And because we went to Abu Dhabi just to save up to buy a house, because we wanted to come back to Ireland. And so I had to work because we were obviously using my husband's wage to live, and then my
Mhm.
wage was going to be our savings. So I
Okay.
couldn't stay home, which I had done with my first two kids. And I remember teaching it and just finding it really difficult. I found it really emotional teaching it
Yes.
because I knew I wasn't at home and I wasn't with my baby.
Mm.
And I felt actually quite resentful about the
Mm.
theory, because I was a bit like, look, I'm doing my
Yeah,
best.
yeah, mother
I'm doing everything.
blaming.
Yeah, so it's it's true, and it's everything, and yet it's not something we prioritize. And I think
Yes.
dominantly women feel that guilt and feel
Mm.
that pressure. And for me as a teacher, I lead with relationship. Like, it has to be the core of everything. And I think a lot of teachers do nowadays. But I think, yeah, teaching is first and foremost about the child, and then you get to the subject, the curriculum,
Mm.
whatever that comes after.
Mm.
But because you know it yourself as a human, like, I suppose it's just weird that we don't reflect on it a bit more.
Mm.
Like, if you're not in a good place, or if you're not in the right mood, even like not
Yeah.
even looking at more severe issues like
Yeah.
trauma, just even on a very basic everyday level, how you're feeling in yourself affects everything. It affects your ability to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's really odd that in the past in education, we've just assumed that children are in this place ready to learn, the minute
Yes.
they get in the door. Just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't tally with human experience.
Yeah.
So I just wish that that the system, that the way we live our lives now allowed for that
Mm.
time and that.
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Jen. And a lot of what you said there matches my own experience. I do think women blame themselves a lot for things. And the simple fact is now it's very hard for a family to have one income. So even where moms or dads might decide they want to stay at home, it's barely feasible, particularly in a country like Ireland. And the other thing is that we don't understand maybe the importance of caring for the caregivers as well, minding them in order to maximize their capacity to be safe and content and present and all of that. When you mentioned there that you like relationship is sort of front and center for you as a teacher, was it always, even when you were a younger teacher? Like, would you have known instinctively how important it was, do you think?
I think I did, to an extent.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it was just my personality to kind of want to make connections. And I was always very sensitive as a young person. And so I definitely kind of saw myself in young people and kind of
Yeah.
wanted to be kind to them,
Yeah.
knowing how sensitive I was. But the system I worked in in England and then in Abu Dhabi. And I think in a lot of English and international British schools, there's a lot of pressure on attainment.
Okay.
There's an awful lot of academic tracking. So as a teacher, you're under a lot of pressure to get certain results from students, regardless of what's going on for them.
Yeah.
And I think it took me a while to figure out that that was rubbish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I definitely fell into it. And I would say, when I look back now on my time in Abu Dhabi, particularly, because it was a very high achieving school,
Okay.
like the motto of the school was exceed expectations.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
we're going to the top.
Yeah.
And you fall into the context you're in, and maybe that's a survival thing. You
Yeah.
have to some extent, go along with the way things are. And like, when I got it, like, if I get a set of results, let's say for GCSE or A level, I'd look at those results and they would be my results, as if I'd sat the exam.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, and because that was the culture, you would be asked in, like, to discuss the results, with your head of
Wow.
department. The results would go up in front of the whole school. How did this department do, And so, of course, you're going to carry that responsibility. But it definitely distracted from what I now 100% believe is the core of education, which is relationships. And I suppose I've learned that more, definitely, since returning to Ireland.
Okay.
And I'm really grateful for it, because I'm in a school that really is committed to relationships first. And I struggled with that as well. I think every time you change as a teacher, which is why change is really good, I struggled to adapt, because I had been in a setting that was all about high expectations and perfect behavior and, no distractions to learning and to succeeding.
Yes.
And so I took a while to kind of almost relax myself.
Yeah. Thaw a little bit.
Yeah. And trust that nobody was going to judge me or kind of put me on the spot and ask me why I didn't do this or that or get this result. Or
Yeah, wow, that does sound so stressful in a way. And one of my favorite theories is a thing called polyvagal theory. And the guy, Stephen Porges, who designed it or came up with it, he said that academia is actually a very hostile, unsafe environment because you're in a constant state of evaluation. And it sounds like that's exactly what you were in as well, along with the students. You know, your performance was constantly under the microscope or in the spotlight, as was theirs. The other thing that struck me as you were talking there is, of course, just because kids are in a highly privileged school does not mean that there's not emotional neglect or abuse or other things going on for them, or racism maybe, or, you know, things that are getting in the way of their ability to learn. And we can sometimes forget that, I think, and presume.
Absolutely. And I don't want to paint that school in a terrible light, because actually it was a very caring school, and staff did look out for and look after children. And of course, we came across many children in that circumstance, you know, that who were struggling with various issues. So because they're, again, the good side of humans, we're not going to, I think, you know, like it's never going to be solely, you know, focused on academics. But yeah, I'm very aware of that. I suppose to look at me from the outside, I went to a private school when I was younger. And so I know people now who might, well, now I criticize private education. I don't believe in it. I don't agree with it. But I also dislike when people sort of assume that people who went to private education are privileged to the point where they have never suffered or they have never struggled. And I think that's actually, it's just a really divisive way of looking at people. The point is we're all born and we land somewhere, and we don't choose it. Do you know what I mean? And so to blame someone for those kind of the facts of their lives that they didn't really have any input in, I think is really damaging. So I suppose I do try and focus on understanding before judgment, and I think that's something that doesn't always come naturally, you know.
No, it's a practice, a daily practice, I'd say, for all of us. So Jen, maybe tell me a little bit then about the book that you wrote called "Oh Captain, My Captain," a lovely title, about reimagining our education system, and what prompted you to write the book.
Yeah, I think my return to Ireland prompted me very much, because I suppose when you're working abroad, you don't feel as invested in a way, in that it's not your, you know, I knew I was never going to stay in any of the places I was in. So when I came back to Ireland, I really felt a sort of a desire to contribute to Ireland, I suppose, to my system and to where my kids were going to be going to school and growing up. And when I came back, two things kind of struck me. I was struck by what I felt was a very negative attitude towards teachers. And that was one thing I wasn't used to, because particularly in Abu Dhabi, we were given a lot of respect by the community, because I think because they were living away from home, they knew that education was going to be important, so they were very respectful, and they kind of, you know, I felt that respect, and I responded to that respect by really, you know, trying my best, and as you do. And I think I felt a real negativity towards teachers here, a lot to do with the holidays. I mean, the extent to which people begrudge that is really, really alarming. And so I kind of knew in my gut that, well, like, if teachers aren't feeling respected, they're not going to do the best job they can do, because it's such an emotional job. It really is. Like, you're not going in and sitting at a desk, you know, you are constantly interacting with humans, other teachers, SNAs, students, secretary, principal, deputy principal, your parents. You're just surrounded by people who, of course, individually come with their own stuff. So you're having to navigate that all the time. So it's a tiring emotional job. And so you rely on things like respect to buoy you and to kind of keep you going, and to kind of, it's like what you're saying about caring for the carers. I would see teachers as carers as well.
Absolutely.
So you need to feel cared for. So that struck me. So I wanted to kind of address that in the book, which I did in the earlier chapters. And then I suppose the other thing that bothered me was the lack of choice in the system. I was upset by, I don't like compulsory subjects at senior cycle. I think it's very difficult for students. I think we're doing better in Ireland now, just even in the last couple of years, in terms of different pathways for students. post 16 or kind of post the leaving cert, that it's not all about going to university.
Yeah.
Historically, it has been, and that has a desperate effect as well. But the CEO system and the whole focus, the last 2 years, they're absolutely crushing for students. And we see the anxiety, we see the stress levels, and students are going for courses that they're not even really interested in, or I don't think so, because they're told this is what success looks like. So all of that kind of narrative I wanted to kind of question. I also looked at the influence of the Catholic Church on primary education, particularly because we had a real issue coming back with my kids, because we're not religious. And so my children had been in international school, and so my son actually had a really hard time. We sent him to the local school, but he was really excluded. We kind of said to him, look, I was like, do the communion if you want to. Like, we just didn't want him to stand out, because we wanted him to.
Yes, I know the cultural Catholic dominance.
Yeah, so we were just like, he was coming into first class, like, so he was a new boy, and he had a very strong English accent, and so he was different, and we were like, look, just do whatever. And he just really didn't want to. He didn't like it. He just felt very uncomfortable with it. But he was made to feel really, really excluded, and that wasn't a malicious thing by the school. It was just simply that they didn't have the resources to give him a different opportunity. They didn't have another teacher that could take him into another room, so he was just sitting at the back of the class while they were doing their prayers. And because it must have been second class, it was communion year, there was a lot, it was like an hour a day kind of thing. And he had to go to the church, and he was just kind of left at the back of the church. And so he really kind of, I could see it in the way he held himself. So we moved school, they're in a different school now. But I think multi-denominational,
yes,
at the very least, is the way we should be educating our children. I don't like gender segregation either. So I suppose all of those things I look at in the book. And sex education was another thing that bothered me, because of the ethos, the religious ethos, that schools are not covering what they should be covering.
Yes, and just on that, can we actually trust parents? Because it's a difficult subject for anyone really, I suppose, to tackle if they're uncomfortable with it and maybe have lingering shame or embarrassment of their own. But like, parents have cookie or damaging beliefs about all manner of things, so like, do you think we can leave it to parents to rear their son and daughters with healthy sexuality, or does it really have to be ingrained in a very scientific sort of, again, respectful way in the schools?
See, it's tricky, because like, our constitution says that the primary educator is the parent, and that's why we have all the different kind of choices of schools, because it's to satisfy the parents' kind of demand. I kind of would think that there is an issue with letting parents take sole responsibility for all the reasons you've mentioned. I think there's plenty of parents who wouldn't feel comfortable. I think there was a survey done recently, and it came out, I can't remember exactly what the percentage was, but it was something like 1 in 4 parents don't talk about it,
Shocking in this day and age.
Yeah, but like you say, there could be reasons for that, or but yeah, for me, it needs to be objective. It needs to be just kind of clear information around safety and consent, particularly. And I certainly, as a student in Cork, experienced a lot of sort of, damaging opinions that I certainly don't want my children to encounter in the same way. The kind of normalization of behaviors that really, now when I look back, if you look back in the 90s, it's like, what was going on, and there was definitely a lack of education, both probably from families and from schools. But I think the will is there in schools for it to change. And I think, but we're still waiting for an act. Like, there's a Education Act that was presented in about 2017, was it 18 maybe? But that still hasn't passed. But that would allow all schools then to give objective sex education, regardless of ethos.
Yeah. And one thing that greatly concerns me as well, as a mother for both my son and my daughter, but also just for society in general, like, when we were children and teenagers, there was not as much easy access to hardcore porn on a device. And if we're allowing children, if we're abdicating responsibility and passing it over to the internet, would you have any concerns there that, again, the information that they're getting is not conducive to safety or consent or respect or healthy boundaries or anything like that?
Huge concerns. I think it's like, it is such a huge, I think one of the issues we have as well is that as parents, Jane, we grew up in a different environment without that tech. So we're actually not savvy enough to properly navigate it. And I think a lot of parents kind of, oh, the child is quiet in their room, that's fine. You know, the child is behaving themselves. We're still thinking in terms of the 90s, you know, they're nice and quiet there in their bedroom, you know. Actually, no, like they're really, really
vulnerable.
Like, very vulnerable in a very dangerous place. And you know what's very unhelpful as well in the media, there was something recently, you know, like new resources were coming up about acknowledging the role of pornography and about like talking about, you know, the dangers of pornography and how, you know, we need to focus on healthy relationships, and this is not where you should be getting your information on how to conduct a relationship. And there was, I can't remember the paper now, but it came out saying, you know, teachers want to teach porn or something. You know, this kind of flipping it out, like, oh, they want to go in there now and they want to teach porn. And it's amazing, actually, the number of times I've come across parents complaining, like, this is not for the classroom. You know, this is, you are actually infecting children with your ideas, your perverted ideas about sex. But like, look, as a country, we've always been obsessed with sex. I mean, like, you know, the Catholic Church was so obsessed with it. Like, so we're, of course, we're going to, that's still there. Like, that's, we're still
that doesn't go away.
Doesn't go away. Like, we're not, as a people, we're not very comfortable with our bodies, you know, in the same way as other countries, as you'd see when you travel. So we've got a whole lot of baggage, which is why I think that sex ed needs to be open, honest, objective, but also teachers need to be trained. Which they're not. That's a huge issue. Like, teachers have no training. SPHE training isn't done. That's the social, personal, and health education. We don't get any training for that. So you're literally, you turn up in school and you're kind of handed, you've got SPHE. It's like, all right, okay, what's that then? You know,
potentially very mortifying for people, all right, without training.
Awful, unfair, you know, it's not fair. You can't, because of, you know, our context and how we've been. I never got proper sex education. So
nor did I, even though in some ways my mother was very frank and honest about certain things, but then ridiculous about others. And she had quite a gendered way of communicating information to me as a girl, and very different, conflicting, offensive nonsense, I would think, to my brothers then. But that's what I mean, even with the best will in the world, I don't think we can leave it to parents. But as you say, we can't just leave it to teachers either without the supports. And probably not every teacher is suitable for disseminating that information either, possibly.
Agreed. Yeah, I think, like, in our school, it's the tutor who does the SPHE, and I think that makes sense. Like, if you've been asked to be a tutor, it's, you know, it's probably that's maybe you're kind of have a strength with pastoral stuff, so that might make sense then that you go for the SPHE. But yeah, you can't. All teachers are different, you know. And so like with everything,
we might pause here, Jen, and if you have another poem, I'd love you to share another one, please.
Oh, lovely. Yeah,
that would be great.
Thank you. Just thinking out which one. I do find out some of these now that I've sort of picked out in advance are a little bit sad. I'm kind of conscious. Is that okay?
Sad is okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll read you this one. It's a bit of an odd one. I wrote this during lockdown. So yeah, it's called Elderly Shopper. I accidentally slipped my hand beneath hers at the till, shifting a bag of frozen peas along the belt. It felt electric. She jumped a little too. I felt her hand, her warm hand, freeze against the static. That was 7 weeks ago. I'm sad in that shop now, with my folded plastic bag, food for a week, tightly packed. She got up to wash her hands that last time, to be safe, germ-free. I keep my hands inside my sleeves now. Haven't touched anyone since. Years ago, some woman I barely knew said she'd had a dream. I was keeping babies in the inside door of my fridge. What did she mean? I can still see them in tall glass bottles. Wish she'd never told me.
Interesting segue there in the poem, but
It's an odd segue.
so so sad. All right, the description of the hands touching the electricity, and then the frantic, panicked, well, at least that's how I imagine it, panicked washing. That I think nearly everyone can identify with that type of situation, whether we were the frantic washer or the elderly person. You know, how was COVID for you?
It was okay. Like compared to a lot of people, it was difficult because I care for my parents with my siblings, and so that was really difficult. Just trying to manage that, and as a teacher as well, because I was obviously in a fairly exposed position, and then caring for them at the weekends, I found that very stressful. Yeah. It was. I got COVID 3 times, and I feel like I did have long COVID. Like I still feel my energy isn't great. But look, I'm very aware that it was difficult for everyone, and more difficult for others. I have a house and a garden, and I have my kids with me. So it was okay, but God, glad for it to be over. And I think we're all still struggling, aren't we, a little bit?
I think we are, and I think it's well, certainly I am not the same. For it was for people a varying degree of imprisonment, and then those who were out in the world were doing so at huge risk, including the people in the shops who were selling the food to you and the elderly shopper and the rest of us. But I think like as a teacher, are you noticing increased distress or anxiety in your students, or have they made the transition back well enough?
So I think we've noticed that like the older years, like this current 6th years, have definitely been affected. And I think they're in a really difficult spot now because they're kind of facing into, I'm not sure yet how the exam is going to look. I don't know if they're going fully back to the pre-COVID exam paper. But I think they've missed out on an awful lot when you think like their whole kind of senior education has been affected. And it's more the social as well. Like we saw, I think that you'll notice you get into like the pattern of kind of student behavior over the 6 years, and kind of things will sort of tend to happen around 2nd year, 3rd year when they're at that certain stage of development. And then it kind of calms down in 4th year, and then they're actually generally very, very mature by 5th, 6th year. And we've seen that kind of change a little bit. The dynamic of that has changed because there's been a delay, I think, in certain development because of the lack of social interaction. But I'm currently spending a lot of time with 1st years this year because I'm a tutor and I teach them 3 subjects, and they're doing great. They seem to be full of energy and flying it and delighted to be in secondary school. And maybe the change is good for them, that they experienced COVID in primary and now they're in secondary. So maybe it feels like a turning of a new leaf for them. But no, they're doing great. I mean, I find generally teaching is good for just keeping you grounded and keeping you sort of I don't know, they're lovely to be around. Like young people are lovely to be around because they're funny and they're also very real. You get what they are, like they don't cover it up in any way. So yeah, I think they're doing okay.
And it's true for you, when I don't see teenagers that often, but when I do, sometimes they are hilarious to observe, and I remember as well being a teenager and the intensity of the emotions, the likes and dislikes and the drama of it, but with that comes huge vulnerability as well of hurt feelings and rejection and all of that. But to return to relationships for a second, and I suppose also to talk a little bit about your excellent column, Luddy Dobson and Bruce Perry, they define a thing called relational health as the nature, number, and quality of positive relationships in a person's life, whether they're a child or an adult. And on your column on education for the Examiner, you often emphasize this relational dimension of teaching, and even in columns, say, about the public health nurses as well, the relational dimension for the new moms and checking in on the babies for development and stuff. Do you think that we elevate intentionally now, I mean, and across in terms of the Department of Education as well, that we elevate the relational enough in schools, you know, the social and emotional health of both children and students, but also staff?
No.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I think it's I think people do it. I think teachers do it. I think that it's something that we just bring to the job on a human level, but the structure of the system doesn't invite it. It's loads of things, you know. It's just even the number of, like, even like, let's say it's senior cycle, particularly, I suppose, is where I really feel it. It's such a kind of a bottleneck. It's so busy. You've got so many subjects. You've got so many demands. The curriculum is very, very heavy. So even my subject at senior cycle is English. And it's a brilliant subject because, of course, you're teaching texts that they're just full of relationships. You get to talk about, you know, what's personalities and but, you know, you feel like, I never feel like the stuff we do in class is kind of like used to its optimum, because it's always going to have to end up being an essay in a written exam under timed conditions. So I'm quite vocal about wanting a more varied assessment, so that students that I know who are fantastic orally, or who are brilliant at drama, or who are, you know, great at, like, they could be brilliant at producing a podcast, or they could, you know, so there's so many ways to explore English as a subject, you know, or that I just find it really kind of soul destroying that it comes down to an exam. So yeah, the kind of the relationship in the classroom isn't captured at all in the exam, of course, because it's one person in silence in a timed situation. So it's almost like, yeah, we'll do all that nice stuff, but, you know, at the end of the day, when we get serious, it has to be about this.
Yes.
And, you know, let's focus on how you're going to structure your essay. So I think even to the students, they pick up on the message that actually this is all nice and fun, but actually it's not the real thing. The real thing is the exam, and that's what you need to focus on. So just in our school, like, so I suppose, like, in a school day, I can feel the relationship stuff very well enough, but it's almost like the exam then is like a heavy cloud over it. And I suppose what I was saying as well about SPHE not being trained in it, and not being sort of, I think in a lot of schools, people aren't really chosen based on their particular interest in SPHE. They're just kind of given it because we're short on staff, we're short on hours. So, like, Ireland has one of the lowest spending in education, and we in the OECD, and we really feel that on the ground, because it's like I was saying about my son. I'd never blame the school for what happened. I blame the fact that they didn't have the funding and the resources to give him another option. And I think it's the same for us, that we're often stretched, we're doing our best, but ultimately what we're kind of answering to are those final exams and the CAO system, and that's what is the narrative nationally in the media. That's the pressure people are under. So yeah, I don't think, and look, yeah, it's even, you know, I kind of looked, like yesterday I saw on the news that the department is now investing in Microsoft. They're offering, I don't know, there's some initiative with Microsoft for primary school teachers. And if you look at, like, the resources we have for SPHE, they're very, very scant. Like, there's no investment in resources on, you know, teaching empathy, let's say. Like, this is another thing I've written about actually this week. There was an empathy book is coming out in Ireland. I don't know if you hear about it, Jane. And it's brilliant. It's a lovely idea, and they've gotten really interesting people to write pieces for the book. But for me, that is an add-on. You know, that's not an answer to our issue in education. What we need is actual proper funding and proper training for teachers, who are the ones who are in education every day. And I suppose I find it a little bit hard to kind of not feel a bit of condescension.
Yeah.
You know, that celebrities need to come in and fix what teachers aren't doing. And it's like, actually, do you know what? it's well intentioned, and I don't want to sound
Yeah.
snarky about it, because I actually do think it's a wonderful thing that people are
Yeah.
doing, and I think hopefully it will have benefits, and it opens up the conversation which needs to happen. But actually, I would accept it a lot more readily if we had the basic resources and hours and training and time and consistency, because schools are using totally different resources, because we don't really have a bank. We don't have a national agreement on what we're teaching in SPG. So, you know, like there was also a controversy recently about Drink Aware, because people were teaching a program on alcohol that was being funded by the drinks company. And so people were upset over that. But the thing is, nobody's actually really looking at what's being taught in this subject. And if we really do believe that relationships are key, and if we believe that empathy is a core quality that we want to have in young people, shouldn't be relying on celebrities writing books. It should be first, you know, as you say, like foremost in our schools, and kind of
that is a really fascinating and important point, I think, that you make. But even I'll have to read that book, because I do think it sounds interesting and important. But we can only actually be empathetic to one another if we're safe and regulated. We cannot be empathetic in survival mode. So even asking teachers to be more empathetic or to teach empathy, if they themselves are chronically stressed and unsupported, it's an impossible ask. They can do it when they feel okay, but then there'll be times when they won't demonstrate empathy because they just feel disrespected or otherwise disregarded and unsupported. Does that make sense to you, even from your own experience? Yeah.
So much sense, Jane. And I even notice it in myself. I wish it wasn't the case, but I go in some days and I can see that I'm a bit shorter than I'd like to be. And it's because, you know, maybe something has happened that morning, or I haven't had a chance to have a coffee, and I'm just not quite there yet, and I'm not ready to perform, because teaching is a performance. You're in front of a group of people. And so somebody might do something, and I'm like, stop doing that. And that's not who I want to be, because they might also be doing what they're doing for some reason that happened to them. You know, like we're all in our snowballs. So we have to be, as you say, looked after. And that's exactly what the training and the time would give us. It would say to us as teachers, we respect the job you're doing. We respect how important it is. We know that you need to feel secure when you're standing up talking about sex education or talking about trauma or whatever it is that you've asked us to talk about. And I don't think teachers are feeling that. They're feeling a little bit like they've been pushed into it. And that's obviously hugely problematic.
It is.
Yeah.
While we're on this topic, so like, I know that teachers, even pre-COVID, felt strain for various reasons, whether in the primary setting or the secondary setting. You know, certain desh schools have higher numbers of kids who are dysregulated, or, you know, there's too much stress in their lives in order to behave well in the classroom, or there's, you know, growing numbers of maybe kids with special needs and they haven't yet got a diagnosis or whatever, and that's highly stressful. But then COVID exacerbated all the existing strains, and we had to have windows open, and, you know, people were living like yourself with caring responsibilities, sick parents, maybe sick partners. What can we do other than providing the training there in SPHE or other matters to better support teachers to be more present for kids, and especially for the children who are struggling the most, Jen?
It's hard, like, it's a big question. I don't know, is probably the honest answer. I'd have a few thoughts. We've really high contact hours in Ireland, particularly at primary. So even though we do have, looking just at primary, let's say, they've got I think the highest, or among the highest contact hours in Europe. My husband is a primary teacher, and I think they need time away to plan and to regroup. I mean, it's quite simple and human in a way, isn't it? It's like you do need just time, and
a break.
A break, and time is money. And that's why, you know, we do need more teachers. Generally, we need more resources. It's, for me as well, it's stuff like we don't have a school building. And our building is not fit for purpose. It's not a nice place. I find it very unpleasant place to be. So I suppose, again, when I see deals being struck with Microsoft, I'm a bit like, well, can we just get the infrastructure in place first? You know, can we have the basics? Can we have schools? Can we have, you know, like, there's been a lot of focus now, thankfully, on the lack of school spaces for autistic children. But the kind of the narrative now is about just getting the spaces, but actually the spaces that's the first step. You know, there's so much that has to go into providing, again, training for teachers if they're working with autistic children. Like your primary kind of training and teaching is very, very basic. You know, you really don't know how to work with autistic children until you do it, you know. But when you're doing it, then you do need support and training. And I know I think my message is kind of very boring, because I'm just saying the same thing all the time, that it's kind of support and training and space, but it is those things, you know. Like I saw this morning, I was just looking, there's been a real issue with getting examiners to mark papers this year.
Okay.
So I think the junior cert results they're still not in, because they've just really struggled to get people to mark. The leaving cert was also a stretch. They used a lot of trainee teachers to mark them. And I think that is a sign, that's a symptom that actually teachers saying, do you know what, we've done as much as we can do. We're not doing extra.
I'm out of steam here. The cup is empty.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about the cup being empty completely. So I think, that just a kind of acknowledgement. There's a lot coming out now about the fact that, you know, schools weren't as safe as was being claimed. And so there's definitely a feeling of, do you know what, we would have been grand if you just told us the truth, but we don't like being undermined. And
I must, again, on like, safety is one of my favorite topics in the last few years. And people who were in the world during COVID or were being forced out, you know, like, I was very frustrated that the schools were closed and felt my kids would have been better in schools. But on the other hand, I wasn't having to go there teaching, you know, and be dealing with the sense, oh, I could get COVID any minute. You had COVID 3 times. I'm not sure I had it once. Do you know what I mean? That's due to your exposures. So that does kind of undermine a sense that people have your backs as well, if you sense that you weren't fully informed.
There was a lot, and maybe I'm probably stupid that just I've kind of tried to control it a bit more now, looking at social media, you know. But at the time, I just saw a lot of complaints about, why aren't the schools open? Teachers need to get back in there, you know, kind of attitude. A lot of people saying, oh, well, teaching, it's the same as nursing. It's the same kind of job. You're a frontline worker. You need to carry on. And even from family members, I got that, you know. And the truth is, I wanted to be in school. Like, it was so hard to teach from home. It really, and because of what we're saying, that relationships are so important, you need to be in the room with the students. And so I did actually want to be in school, but that attitude really didn't help. Like, we were calling nurses heroes, but teachers were only getting the negative, as far as I could see. And of course, I wouldn't take away from the fact that nurses were heroes. They are, they absolutely are, and they deserve every bit of that praise and a whole lot more. But the contrast in the attitudes to teachers was really, really upsetting, I think. And that took from people's well-being in a big way.
Of course it did. And it goes to your earlier point about respect and the lack of esteem maybe that we hold teachers in, really. I think for lots of people, the idea that teachers, particularly in primary, provided essentially a kind of babysitting service, rather than even, like, that was more important, I think, for many than the educational component, so that they could do their work or have a bit of headspace, you know, which.
And I'm you know, I accept that as well, because, as like I was saying earlier about, you know, not having the time to focus on attachment. People are under pressure, do you know what I mean? And I saw that with my friends, like 2 people working in kind of high pressure jobs with their toddlers at home. It was
chaos,
unmanageable. So of course they were looking for help. And of course the obvious help was school. So it's all very understandable from everyone's point of view. But I suppose the way that we approach it and speak to and about each other is important.
It really is. Yes, I think that's so important. Just again, to do maybe a little bit about training. There's greater awareness now, but it's still maybe, I don't think, what it could be for schools. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who was the Surgeon General of California there for a while, she set up the Center for Youth Wellness in California, and they found that once they started routinely screening children in the clinic for adverse childhood experiences, that kids who had 4 or more of them compared to those who had none were 32 times more likely to be diagnosed with things like ADHD or opposition defiance disorder, that type of thing. Do you think that teachers, like all teachers now, not just specialized ones, need to understand the various manifestations of trauma in the classroom, Jen?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's core. And I suppose, like you were saying, and you were drawing attention to, we don't know a teacher's background either. So it has to be a sort of a wraparound thing. God, it's difficult. Like, it's so complicated. Really is. It all is. But I think I've grown hugely since coming back to Ireland, in that now when I see a behavior, I'm not thinking, old child, get out of my classroom, you're going on detention. That's probably the furthest thing from my mind now. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, why is that happening? What's going on for that child? How can I support them? And it's not that I always have an answer, and it's not that it's easy. And there are some children who the last thing they want is to be given any kind of attention or any kind of support, and they just want to be left alone. And to a certain extent, I do that now, and I will kind of celebrate any involvement that the child has. So, like, I will celebrate whatever it is the child kind of does in the class to engage with it, rather than having a set expectation of where I want all of them to get to, which is what you're told as a trainee teacher. Like, I remember being told as a trainee teacher, if everyone in your class hasn't got to this point at the end of your lesson, then your lesson is a failure.
Wow.
That's the pressure you're put under, because it's like, well, you did a good job for those 7, but I saw that. And I remember it actually, I was observed, and the observer was at the back of the classroom, and he said to me, now, well, there was a boy at the back there now, and he was looking out the window. I don't think he was listening to you at all, and you didn't spot it. You didn't get him back in. So there's an assumption when you're training that it's your job to manage and to like predict and to determine what's going to happen for all the children in the room, and you're going to get them all to this one place. It's completely daft, and I would love, like, but look, it's a learning curve. But I would love now to know. I'd actually love to go back as like a fly on the wall trainee teacher and see what's being taught in UCC, like locally, because I don't know.
That's an idea for a column. That's a great idea. In you go.
With my glasses and my hat, and just see, like, well, how much I like, because I don't want to. Maybe it's changed a lot. Maybe they're getting a lot of training now. I have spoken to, and I spoke for my book, I spoke to kind of recent PMEs. And they hadn't got much training, and they hadn't got much training, particularly on additional needs. They didn't feel equipped. The thing is, like, the focus for me anyway was much more about my subject. So you did a lot on methodology and stuff, and you do a lot of the history of education, but like all of that stuff is kind of academic. Like, it's really, because it's a human thing, teaching. So really it has to be about, this is what different people can experience, and this is how they might react to that experience, and everything you're speaking about with ACEs, like, that's because, like, we all know, like, they can't learn. You just can't learn unless you're okay and safe and secure and attended to, and
But even for the teachers, if you're dealing with challenging behaviors, you can make it worse. Like, if I start to shout, or look, if my body language gets very aggressive, a child who sees that as a life threat will zone in, and it'll make it worse. So just to know, to try and be the regulated one, challenging as that can be at times, but to even take the break, to step outside, and also maybe as well, this goes to the wider supports for teachers, that there is space and time to supervise the teachers in relation to emotional regulation and what they might be having to deal with in their classrooms. I suspect there's zero time for that in most schools.
Beyond kind of informal chat over a cup of tea, where you're like, oh, like, I found that really hard or whatever. That can happen. But again, it's a race. Like the day is a bit of a race, you know, if you've got 9 lessons and or not, we've 6 in a day, but
It's a
um
lot.
it's a lot, yeah. One thing I would say is I found like restorative practice very
Oh,
useful.
great.
And our school has taken that on, and there was an effort last year to set up a kind of a restorative practice group that would meet on a Thursday and just talk through any sort of issues that they were having. And I actually didn't manage to make it to any of the meetings last year, but I think it's something we might try and do again. But restorative practice, I think, goes kind of hand in hand with being trauma
It
informed.
does.
They work really well together.
Yeah.
Just because you are thinking always about the context of the person and, you know, de-escalating and repairing rather than, you know, so all that stuff kind of works. And I think that it's a manageable training. It's, and I talk a lot about funding and stuff, but I suppose I do think a lot of it is attitudinal, and it can just take a little in terms of training to really foster a culture and an environment in a school. Like I think our school has a very positive culture now in terms of understanding the diversity of our students and their different circumstances. And you once you started in a school, it kind of spreads like wildfire, because it's you're sort of, you know, everyone's mirroring it for each other or for one another. And like, you'd never hear someone shouting now in my school. It just wouldn't happen. It's just not what we do.
Yeah.
So, but I think it takes like our principal is really, really supportive, and it does take leadership.
Yes.
It takes
to drive it, and then the kind of the listening and giving it time and space to bed down and listening to any things that aren't working and making adjustments. But it is a kind of restorative practice is a win-win for staff as well, I think, you know, because you do feel more effective if you can see that implementing a few different practices actually have much better results for the young people involved, rather than being punitive.
Definitely. Like the punitive model, I hope, is on the way out. I really do. Because you're just a cycle.
Yeah, I've one final question for you, Jen, and then maybe you might still have time for a poem, and thanks so much. But what do you think politicians and policymakers can do to promote safe, healthy relationships in childhood and across the life course, including in classrooms?
Respect for carers. Like the thing is, a lot of what we're seeing in classrooms is the result of stuff that's happened years ago, or happened long before children came to school. So I suppose I'd start there. I'd start early years. I think early years sector needs a lot more support. And people working in that sector need a lot more support, and they need a lot more respect for what they're doing and how important that work is. Parents need a lot more support. So it comes down to stuff like just economics, you know, just everyone's just in a race, aren't they, against time, and the human connections, they just need time. They just need they need for people to feel like they can spend an hour just sitting on the floor with their child, and they need to know how important it is. So education as well, because I think a lot of what happens is not down to badness, it's down to a genuine lack of understanding of how important, like, I as a mother am, you know, or my husband as a father is. It's central to us as humans, and we've just gotten caught up, I suppose, in progress and productivity and look, survival, ultimately survival for many people. But I would question the whole kind of economic model, like capitalism. It's a biggie, but like, you know, that I love ideas of like circular economies, and the idea now that we know that we have to slow down on every level. We have to slow down to save our environment. We have to slow down to save our relationships. And that's actually what keeps us. That is it. Like, there's nothing else. But there isn't. Like, but you know, most of what we hear about in the news, like the policies and it's all kind of secondary stuff. And none of it really, it doesn't feel like it really approaches the primary stuff. And that's, I was very upset as well over the cuts in the baby checks. That was one of the reasons. It was like, oh my God, like, if we can't do this, if we can't support
at the crucial, very early point in a baby's life, and the mother's well-being and everything, Short-sighted cut.
That's it. I think the one thing, yeah, with policymakers, we're so short-sighted, and it's because of the political cycle, but it's all just for getting the votes for the next cycle. We have to go for the long game, like, because we are long games, aren't we? Like humans, and you see, and so like, yes, schools obviously need support, but really I think in those first few years, supporting the family and the child, that will actually greatly reduce the challenges that schools face later on. So that's where I think I would put my focus if I could.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Will you share one more poem with me, please?
Yeah, I'll just see now. I don't want to be ending on a kind of a downer. So I'll see. Did I include anything that's even remotely? Oh well, this one, I suppose, could kind of be seen as, anyway, look, I'll read it, and it's
please. They're beautiful.
It's about,
and all emotions, Jen, are acceptable. Sadness, we need to lean into it sometimes.
Do you know what? I totally agree with you, but I suppose I'm always as well, though, quite, like, I think I probably tend towards the sad, you know, just naturally, just tend to be a bit melancholic, and I am conscious of other people's well-being. So, you know, when you read something sad, because then I've gotten quite sort of strict now on limiting what I read and what I look at, and there's a part of me that's like, oh my God, I'm an awful person that I'm not engaging with this deep tragedy, you know. I should be involved, and I've just really stopped. I'm just like,
minding yourself.
It is. So I suppose that's why I do I do embrace the sadness. So this is called Taxi. The driver's words are tumors, fat and fibrous with teeth. Sure, I've seen him blacks fighting in our streets. His mouth is a gargoyle spout, ink-snaked neck, moss on rivered stone, young voluptuous women blown across his bones. Tell you girls, soon Cork won't be our own. Soon Cork won't be our own. Down the bend of road he shrinks to small talk, his trip up north, not noticing the cold tap run inside my tone. Got the cataracts done, got a deal, living in a fog and me behind the wheel, fright to God I didn't get killed. His eyes are clean. They're clean, but there's no light in them. They belong to a child, unsurprised by what's been done to him. By the time I leave, I'm wishing him well, remembering again what it means, this being human.
What a great place to finish, actually. It's an interesting poem. Again, I mean, I love the line about the tone, not noticing the tone. And then, of course, it's so true that we are products of what we've lived through. And if we're spewing hateful views, we've learned them somewhere, you know. So, and the need for compassion or understanding there if we ever want to try and change it as well, which again comes back to the education system and the phenomenal work you do. So Jen, thank you very much for joining me today. I really enjoyed it.
Jane. I loved it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. This was Relationships Matter with me, Jane Mulcahy, and Jen Horgan. Thanks very much for tuning in.